It's my great pleasure to introduce to this video for MayflowerFest Rachel Carter, who is an artist who works in many forms, including sculpture, and she's going to talk and share with us a little bit about some of her processes leading up to the creation of what I think are going to be two artworks called The Pilgrim Woman. And welcome, Rachel. It's really lovely to have you.
Hi.
Taking part in these
Thank
videos.
you.
Well, the first picture I've got is you looking out to sea on a boat with a rather beautiful sunset in the background. Why are you on a boat? Where are you going and what are you doing?
Well, very often when you're starting a commission or a project, the first thing for me to do is lots of research, and that could be going to a place, talking to community, working with the community. And I was looking at migration, looking at my own family's migration, but then that of the separatists who fled England and then ultimately left on the Mayflower. And I thought, how can I make sense of what they went through unless I, as an artist, do it myself? So I looked at the Mayflower. It was a Tudor cargo ship designed to carry wine and not a cargo of people. So I thought, well, what do we have today that's similar? And I thought, well, we have freight ships. So I travelled up to the port of Liverpool and boarded a freight ship, and I crossed the Atlantic, completely cut off from the outside world. I had no contact with my family for the entirety of the journey. And it really did help give me that sense of, or a flavour of what they may have gone through.
I think you also read some of William Bradford's journal at the same time. Is that right?
Yes. So I wanted
what kind
to
of
read
parallels
it.
did you see between your journey, which I take it was a lot shorter, and
Yeah,
William
much
Bradford's
shorter.
journey?
Yeah. So I was trying to read them in read the accounts as I was traveling. So I was kind of getting a parallel flavour. He talked a lot about the sailors, particularly one in particular who seemed to take great delight in mocking some of the other travellers that were being sick. And it was quite funny that on that day that I was reading that, we had the most horrible weather and
No.
the boat was going up and down all over, and I could hear some of the crew being sick. But also the leaving people behind, because I know a lot of the separatists, when they left Leiden, left family members behind, and that must have been heart-wrenching. And for me, even though I knew I was going to return, leaving behind my husband and children, it was really gut-wrenching, and not being able to hear them every day and talk to them on the phone. So I think I really did get a first-hand taste of what the Pilgrims may have gone through.
And were you creating art on board in the middle of all of that, or did you kind of park your creativity for a while and just kind of soaked up the experience?
I worked throughout. So on a modern day freight ship, there's no TV, there's no radio, there's no phone. So all you have to entertain yourself, well, for me, it was reading lots of books, listening to the few albums that I'd managed to download on my phone before I left. And I was doing a lot of work, experimenting with macrame, knotting, and creating patterns based on some of the pieces that I'd seen in my first artist residency, which was in Nottingham's Industrial Museum. There was an interesting link that I found with the separatists who went over to Leiden, that some of them would have been very familiar, or if not, worked within the textile industry. And within my own family, I found lace makers, glove makers, stockingers, framework knitters. I used my time on board the ship to try and replicate some of those patterns, but using macrame, which is something sailors would have been extremely familiar with, because a lot of our modern day knots were developed by sailors.
And so I understand that you displayed some of those works, or you talked about them when you arrived in the US. Do you sense that the story of the Pilgrims is treated differently each side of the Atlantic? I mean, kind of what kind of response did you get to your journey and what you were exploring?
Well, when I arrived in America, I had a few days studying at Harvard University. They allowed me to go into the archives at the Peabody Museum. So the first experience was to see some of the woven items made by peoples of the First Nations. And that was fascinating. And I just felt so privileged to be able to have a look at those and sketch and record them. And then I went over to Provincetown, where I did my third artist residency. And I spent 16 days in the museum. And the most popular item was the weaving table. So I set out this big table with weaving boards and all these beautiful coloured cords. And I found as people sat there having a go and weaving, I think I wove with around 600 visitors over that time.
Oh, goodness.
They wanted to ask questions. And it was interesting that they were fascinated with the origin story. A lot of them had no idea that the separatists, including William Bradford, who they were so familiar with, came from the Midlands. And then the next question was, where is the Midlands? And a lot of them had no idea that that story began there. They all seem to assume that they came from Plymouth because that was the last port they left from. So Plymouth to Plymouth. But a lot of them didn't know about that origin story, about the roots, and to help them sort of visualize where the Midlands was. I said, well, have you heard of Robin Hood? And that was it. Yes, they all knew Robin Hood. The area of the story for me is about the origin story, about the Midlands, about people severing their roots and moving, which I was finding a lot in my own family history, and thinking what that must have been like to believe in something so wholeheartedly that you would sever your roots with your community and uproot and go and move. And it must have been a tough decision. And the reasons for my own family, I found.
I think the next picture I've got is a picture to do with your family. That's the Bramley shop. So you found that there were lots of stories of migration within your own family, and you kind of. I love the fact that you're weaving, because you're weaving stories and time periods and making links. Could you just again just tell us a little bit about these stories of migration that have touched you and made you think about that ideas of separation and loss and bravery, really?
Of course. Well, there's one story that really comes to mind. It was a very strong story, and when I started uncovering it, it was a fascinating story, and it begins with one of my Bramley ancestors. I found around 200 years worth of Bramley ancestors who were framework knitters. So it was a cottage industry. They would work at home on a frame, and the whole family worked around that frame. And then as the Industrial Revolution began to pick up speed, you see the Luddite movement, where people were against the mechanised system, but also the poor pay that these people were getting paid. So they were called stockingers, a framework knitter, and there's a local saying, "Note as poor as a stockinger," and that was obviously very true of my own ancestors. Lord Byron got involved because he came from one of the areas that was heavily involved with framework knitting, and I know that he spoke to quite a few people to get more information, and I found a piece in a book where he's meeting in secret a gentleman called Thomas Bramley on the Quarrybank Road, and my ancestor was Thomas Bramley, and the age fits. So it's so tantalising to feel that it could have been my ancestor that was helping Lord Byron, who then went on to speak in Parliament about the plight of the framework knitters. Unfortunately, things didn't improve very much for framework knitters, and I find one family in particular that was so affected. We have a young family, a husband and wife, and two small children, a newborn and a 2-year-old. And it must have been the period when the Industrial Revolution had really moved on apace because we find this framework knitter out of work. So he's a highly skilled individual, illiterate, and for no fault of his own has found himself out of work. And the only place for him is the workhouse. So he has to leave his home, take his family with him, and the family of four enter the workhouse. Unfortunately, his wife and infant don't survive the workhouse, but his toddler does survive and goes on to carry on the Bramley line. And it was just such a poignant part of that story that sometimes not all migrations are ones that you want to take, that some family members have been forced in their migration, and it must have been such a horrible time to have to leave that industry, to leave your community and be forced to go into a workhouse, be separated from your family, but then for half the family not to survive and leave the workhouse. I'd like to think, that if we all look into our ancestry, we'll find we're never from just one place, that people have migrated throughout the ages, but the reasons for migration are, like you've said, complex, and sometimes they are not chosen, they're forced upon the individual.
And so we move on, and the picture I've got is a group of people busy sewing or busy making something out of cloth. You got involved with weaving, but also with costume with the Pilgrim Women project when you returned. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, sure. My original idea was to have almost a dress in the landscape, and I'd sketched quite a few ideas. I knew I wanted to decorate the dress with a woven pattern, which is where the macrame comes in. And I got to meet the manager at Gainsborough Old Hall, and I showed her this book called The Tudor Tailor, because I wanted to try and reflect the period of the time that the separatists left the Pilgrim Roots district, but also the working class attire, because we often see pilgrims represented in great finery, and that wouldn't be necessarily the case for every traveller. Things like lace would have been a real luxury item. So I wanted to show the working class side, because that is the class that I think all of my ancestors that I found came from. And she said, well, we can make these costumes, we make them all the time. And so the stitching group at Gainsborough Hall is a group of volunteers, and they hand stitch authentic costume from that period. So they've made things from across sort of medieval and Tudor periods that match with the house. We need someone to make it on. So the idea then became that I would be the mannequin.
Oh, fantastic.
And there's things so every couple of weeks I'd return to the hall and stand there with my arms stretched out, and they were pinning things on me and cutting and measuring, and slowly over a period of months I became the Pilgrim Woman.
Can I just ask, why a woman? I mean, it's obvious that you're a woman and you wanted to be the mannequin, but it seems to be quite a purposeful choice not to choose somebody well known like William Bradford um, or John Robinson, but to go with an unnamed woman is a deliberate choice.
It was a deliberate choice. I think from my own experience of researching my ancestors, women are not represented very much in history. So it tended to be the men that I was finding. And the only women that I was uncovering their stories was ones who had been maybe a little bit naughty. I found one individual who, at the age of 19, she was a lace maker. She was arrested for drunk and disorderly on a Friday night in Cross in Nottingham, which I think has
Friday
not
nights in
changed over
Nottingham
that
haven't
time,
changed.
because there's still a lot of yeah, there's still a lot of 19-year-olds getting drunk and disorderly around weekday Cross. But it was, comic stories like this, the ones that I was finding, plus also with working class that most of them were illiterate. I found very few members of my ancestors that could write and read. Mm. And I found also when I was reading Maureen Bradford's account that the women seemed to almost get footnote mentions. You know, even the terrible loss of his own wife got a sentence. And you know, I thought, I'm a woman artist that's working in bronze, and it's a very male-centric world. But also, you know, I have two daughters myself, and I want to show them that, you know, women can achieve great things too. So for me, it was about uncovering the female voice.
How did it feel? Because there's something about, I mean, we live in a world where we very fully express ourselves through what we wear, but you know, you when you put on something, you are kind of inhabiting something. I think it's you know, it's skin close, isn't it? And so to inhabit the Pilgrim Woman, what did that feel like for you after all these years of research?
Well, it wasn't just a costume. It did feel like with each layer I was becoming the Pilgrim Woman. And when the outfit was finished, we headed off to the foundry, and I took some of the stitching group with me, and they had to stitch me into the costume. And as each layer goes on, your posture changes. So the shift goes on, and that's really nice and open and airy. But then once you get to the kirtle, it's designed for your body shape. So as you put that on and it's tightened and laced up, your posture changes. It pulls right in at the waist. Your bust is pushed upwards, not down or flat, but it's pushed up. And you're really contained. But then around your waist, you've got such an amount of fabric gathered. I think the circumference of the base of the kirtle is over 4 meters. So can you imagine having a length of over 4 meters of fabric gathered around your waist, and the weight of that, but then having all your hair removed, and then putting it in the bonnet. So as each piece went on, I felt like I was becoming the Pilgrim Woman. And it really does change your posture, the way you hold yourself, the way that you move through this piece of clothing. And when I showed my own mum the pictures, she didn't recognise me.
And I've just put a picture up with you holding an apple, surrounded by lots of cameras. Is that to kind of create the digital kind of maquette that you were going to work off?
Yes. So I knew I wanted to combine really ancient technologies such as hand stitching and the macrame. I think macrame is around 12,000 years old. But I wanted to combine that with really up-to-date technology, which is photogrammetry, which you see in the picture. And photogrammetry works a bit like, let's say, when you're out and about and you see a beautiful landscape and you want to take a panoramic shot on your phone or your camera. Quite a lot of them will produce, when you hit panoramic, a little line, and you move your camera and you follow that line, and the camera is taking lots and lots of pictures. And then when you've finished, it stitches them all together, so you've got this beautiful panoramic shot. What photogrammetry does is do the same thing, but in the 3D. So there's all of these big rigs all the way around you, 360, and there's 160 cameras, and you'll see I'm holding an apple, which is a very special apple. It symbolises quite a few things. It's the Pilgrim 400 apple, which is a new apple that was discovered and is being planted around England as part of the celebrations. But also referencing that my maiden name is Bramley, which is the name of another famous apple that came from the Midlands, but also as a symbol of regrowth, you know, that from that little pip grows a tree, and that brings more fruit, and you've got the generation. So there's a lot of symbolism tied up in that apple that I'm holding in my hand.
And yeah, so would you now go from how you went from that to the bronze?
Yes, so
see the image there.
So what you can do now, but once you've got your 3D picture, is that you can edit it. And for one of the commissions, they wanted the community to be I ran something called the 50 Women Project, and we put a call out to find a minimum of 50 women living in the Pilgrim Roots district today. We actually got close to 100, and over 4 weeks they learned macrame, and a lot of them wove panels. I also wove a panel, and each one of those pieces were then also digitally scanned and added to the dress. So for one of the commissions, it has an intricate pattern, and for the other commission, her dress is left plain. And from that digital file, you can then send it to a special 3D printer. And to create a bronze, I'm just going to go on a little loop to help explain. So each bronze starts life as a wax. And once you've got your wax piece, you then submerge that in a liquid plaster. And once the plaster's set, you pop that into a kiln, and the kiln heats up, and all of the waxwork melts away. And what you're left with inside that plaster is an empty pocket in the shape of your wax. And that's where the molten bronze goes. So they pour the molten bronze into the plaster, it floods through the plaster and finds all those pockets and fills it up. And once it's cool, you smash away the plaster, and inside is your bronze version. Now, there is a special polymer that can be 3D printed, and it will also behave like a wax. So once the 3D model is finished, we can set the height of that model. So for one of the commissions, it's a full size based on my height, so that's 5'6". And for one of the other commissions is a smaller bronze, which is 50 centimetres.
There's something rather beautiful, I think, about the lost wax, or in your case, the lost polymer technique, is that you're filling absence with the bronze, with the precious stuff. And that, you know, to have the Pilgrim Woman and to give her a presence is again sort of filling the absence with these precious stories that you've collected. I think that's rather lovely. And do we have a time scale on when there's with COVID and everything else? It's obviously impacted this project. Do we know when that's going to take place?
Yeah, COVID did impact it quite a bit, but I'm pleased to say that we're back on track. We're hoping to have the Gainsborough Pilgrim Woman installed this autumn, and the Austerfield one is going on a short stay in Doncaster first. It's going to be housed in the new Danham Gallery, which is still a building site at the moment, and I think they're planning to open that in the new year. And so she'll take pride of place there. But interestingly, the building site, they've taken a really old building and kept some of it, and then built the new building around it, encapsulating this old building. And the old building used to be a school for girls. So it's such a fitting place for her to go. But there's also a third Pilgrim Woman, and that is a limited edition. So I thought that, you know, people have become so interested in this project that I thought, well, some people might want to have one for themselves.
So thank you very much for all of that, Rachel, and giving us just an insight into this absolutely fascinating project that's literally woven all sorts of strands together. I guess, you know, people watching this for MayflowerFest, where people of faith, they come from the congregational tradition, which looks to the separatists. Did the faith of the Pilgrims touch you at all as you were researching this, you know, and reading William Bradford? You know, was there anything that resonated with you, or that you admired, or even that challenged you?
There was quite a few parts, particularly I think when I was on the boat and I was missing my family and my girls, and I was reading a bit about, I think it was actually William Bradford himself and his wife, when they had to leave their son behind. Maybe they felt he was too young to take the journey. And I don't know how I felt about it, and it still bothers me. You know, that how could they have left him behind? And they're obviously thinking that, well, they're protecting him because maybe they don't know if they'll arrive. But to leave him behind, that was tough. So I wasn't quite sure how I felt about that. But then, you know, there was quite a few other things in there, and they must have just believed so wholeheartedly that what they were doing was the right thing and what God wanted them to do. And they must have, so that sort of kind of helped me make sense of it, that they felt that it was something they had to do. And I suppose I was also questioned by my mum. She did not want me to go on that freight ship at all. And she's like, why do you have to do it? And I said, because I need to experience it as an artist. But she said, you could just fly to America and, you know, and work with people there and see all the things. I said, but it won't be the same. I need to go through that separation. And it was the longest time away from my family ever, 4 weeks. And I think towards the end of those 4 weeks, I did have a few tears, you know, where I was thinking, you know, this is hard. I'm ready to go home.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for giving up your time to be part of MayflowerFest and do this recording. If you're interested, Rachel has a podcast on her website that you can link into. We'll put all the details on the MayflowerFest website and with the Congregational Federation. And you can also find details about that Pilgrim Woman statue that you can artwork that you can purchase as well. So thank you very much.